Hello, in this session is our third session and I'm going to talk about control structures, for example, selection. When you write the code as a programmer, those lines of code can be compiled and run differently based on some conditions. The first way for compiling and running the codes is called sequential, and it means your codes will be run sequentially line by line. First the first line, then the second line, and so on. The other type is called selection. It means a special condition will be checked, and if that condition is satisfied, a portion of code will be compiled and run, else another portion of code will be compiled and run or will execute. So in Java, in order to implement selection, we use if, else, and switch. And in this presentation, I will explain them in more detail. The other type is repetition. What it means by repetition is that in repetition, somehow the same as selection, a special condition will be checked each time. If that condition is satisfied, a special line of code will be executed repeatedly until that condition holds. So for implementing repetition, we will use while, do while, and for in Java. There are some useful tools that you can use before writing the code, and it can help you to write your code very easier. The first one is the pseudocode. So it helps you think about your code and be able to write your code more efficiently. The other one is the flowcharting. So flowchart actually is a graphical way to create the code and to show the algorithm of your code. The other one is a stepwise refinement of the algorithm. So you can use any of these three tools in order to start writing your code. So let's see about true and false. Before explaining more about selection, we need to know some more information. So selection and repetition statements, both of them involves a decision step, and that decision step in both of them can get the value of true or false. In Java also we have a special data type which is called Boolean, and the Boolean data type can take two values, true or false. Also, we have some functions that those functions as a result can return true or false answer or a Boolean answer. In programming language, there are some expressions, and those expressions also can have true or false values, and they are called Boolean expressions. So these are some examples that can have two values, true or false. That is good to know, and we will use them in selection and repetition. So we have some logical operators. Logical operators can be categorized into comparison operators and Boolean operators. Comparison operators are those operators that will compare the value of two variables and will return true or false. For example, is equal to, is not equal to, is less than or equal to, is greater than or equal to. So they are the comparison operators. X is equal to Y. So if the value of X be equal to the value of Y, then the final result that will be returned is true. For Boolean operators, again, the value that will be returned can be true or false. Some of the Boolean operators are as follows: not, and, or exclusive or. For example, not x, x and y. It means when both x and y be true, then the result will be true, x or y. It means when x or y, one of them or both of them be true, the final result will be true. So these are some operators that will be used as test expressions in selection statement or repetition statements. So you can use them. It's good to know, good to remember them. In the previous slide, we talked about comparison operators and Boolean operators. So here you can see some examples. So for example, in the first one, it says x greater than 0 and y greater than 0 and z greater than 0. Means this expression is true when all of these x, y, and z be true. Or in the next expression, it says x less than 0 or y less than 0 or z less than 0. So this expression can be true when at least one of x, y, or z be less than 0. In the next example, we have number of students be greater equal than 20 and the class average not be less than 70. That's exactly the same as number of students be greater equal than 20 and class average be greater or equal than 70. The Boolean operators and or have both of them have a feature which is called short circuit evaluation. For example, for and, when we have x and y, if x be false, then there is no need to evaluate y. So, for example, in the example that we have here, it says d not be 0 and n divided by d be greater than 0. So if d is 0, then the whole expression would be false and the next part won't be evaluated, right? Or for the or, when we have x or y, at least one of these two, x or y, needs to be true, right? So if x is true, then there is no need to evaluate y anymore. So as you see, it makes this evaluation way shorter. So now that you are familiar with logical operators and some other important information about selection, let's see how we exactly can create a selection statement and what are the rules in Java programming for this type of statements. So now that we talked about some rules and we recognize that what are the selection statements, let's see what are the appropriate syntax for this type of statements in Java programming language. In the previous slides, I showed you that we have if else, and switch as the selection statements, right? So let's see how we can write these statements in Java. For if, first you will write down if, parentheses, inside the parentheses, Boolean expression, braces, and then inside the opening braces and closing braces, you will write down the statements. And for if else, again, you will write down if, parentheses, inside the parentheses, Boolean expression, opening braces, statements, closing braces, else, opening braces, statements, and closing braces. Exactly like what we have here as the syntax. So here there are some important points that you need to keep in mind. First, the condition is always Boolean expression, and the value of this Boolean expression can be true or false. Then the other point is about the braces. So if the statements are just one line of code, then you don't need opening braces and closing braces. You can just ignore them and write the statement. The other point is that indentation for these statements is good for making the code more readable, but it doesn't affect compiling at all. Well, now let's see some simple examples for selection statements. In the first example, what we are going to say is that, for example, uh, we have a grade, a variable grade, right? That is 70. So we want to check if the value of grade is, for example, greater than or equals 68, then we print, for example, passing in output. So that's our goal. So let's see how we can implement this in Java. First, we have a variable, right? So we need to declare this variable and initialize this variable. So that's integer int grade b. Here we have it's 70, right? So int grade 70 semicolon, don't forget semicolon. Then we have if statement, a selection statement. So if open parentheses, inside the parentheses we need to put the condition, right? So what's the condition? The condition, we need to check the value of grade, right? So if the value of grade is greater than or equals to 68, right? We have it here. So is greater than or equal to 68. Then what we are going to do as this statement, print passing in output. Printing, so system.out.print. Because it's just one line, we don't need the braces. So system.out.print passing and semicolon. So that's our code. Let's run the code. Well, you see in the output passing because the grade is 70, right? So the condition holds, so we can print passing as the output. That's one example. Let's see another example for if else. For example, we have a variable x, right, with value of, for example, 2. The value of x is 2. And we want to check. So we want to check if the value of x is 0, we print the value of x is 0, print, for example, nothing here. If the value of x is not 0, print there is a value, right? So that's what we are going to implement. So first we declare the variable x, then we initialize this variable. So int xb2, right? Then if else, if open the parentheses, if x equals 0, we are going to print something. System dot out dot println nothing here. Else system dot out dot println, for example, there is a value. So let's run this code. Okay, so we see there is a value here. Since the value of x is 2, this part will be executed. So we can see there is a value in the output. So that's another example. Let's see the other example. We have, in this example, 3 variables, right? And y is 5. That's one variable. Another variable is counter, that is, for example, 3. And another one is success, that is a Boolean variable with value of false. So we want to check if the value of y is not 4, then we have some statements. So if the value of y is not 4, we want to print, for example, wrong number multiply the value of y by 2 and increase the value of counter by 1. Else, if the value of y is 4, then we want to print, for example, that's it. And assign a new value to success. What is that new value? It's, for example, here it's true because it's a Boolean variable. It's been initialized as false. So now we want to change it to be true. Let's see how we can implement that. So first we need to declare and initialize these variables. Declare y because it's integer, int y be 5. Don't forget semicolon. Declare counter because it's int counter be 3. Don't forget semicolon. Declare success, it's Boolean. Success be false. So we have declared and initialized our variables. Then we have if else, right? So if, open the parentheses, if y is not 4, right? Then we need to print something. So system dot out dot print ln wrong number. Then we need to multiply y by 2. So y be y multiplied by 2, and we are going to increase the counter, right? So we can use counter plus plus. Do you remember that? We had it in the previous session, right? So that's for if. What about else? So if the value of y is 4, print that's it, assign a new value to success. What's that new value? It's true. So else, since we have several statements, we will open braces, write system dot out dot println. What we are going to print? That's it. Do you remember how we could implement that? By the escape sequence, right, for printing the single quotation. So that's it, right? Then success be true. Well, let's run this code. As the output we see wrong number, right? Wrong number here. Why? Because the value of y is 5, right? So the first condition holds, and these statements will be executed. So we can see as an output wrong number, the value of y, it's been 5, right? Now it will be 10. The value of counter was 3, now it's 4. Well, that's about some very simple examples about the selection statements. Okay, now that we saw some simple examples for if and if-else statements, let's see some more examples. For example, a nesting if-else statement. Consider that in this example we have two variables like so we want to check nesting if else. In this example we have two variables A and B, which are the main variables. So A, for example, is 100 and B is, for example, 10. And we have three other variables like we call them C, D, and E. We initialize them to be, for example, R0. So what we want to do is we want to check if the value of A is, for example, greater than 90, we then check the value of B. And if the value of B is, for example, less than 0, we will change the value of C. And if it's not, we will change the value of D. And if the value of A is not greater than 90, then we will change the value of E. Let's see how we can implement this problem. So first we initialize A to be 100, B to be 10, C to be 0, D be 0, E be 0, right? Then we say if A is greater than 90, right? Then we will check the value of B. We will see whether it's less than equal to 0 or not. So if this value is less than equal to 0, then we will change the value of C to be, for example, 1. And else, we will change D to be 1, right? So we need another else here, right? For this if. And here we say E. We are going to change the value of E. So this one, a very simple example of nested if else. So you see we have one if else, and then inside the if, right, inside the braces as the statements, we also have another if else statement. So it's called nested if else. So let's compile this code. And for example, finally we are going to print system dot out dot print b. Let's see. For example, E. Okay, so since A is greater than 90, this part will not be executed. We will be in this part, right? So if I want to print, for example, C, okay, so you see this part is not executed since B is greater than 0, so this part will be executed, right? So let's print D. Well, you see, D has been increased by 1, right? So you can see that this line of code has been executed. So that's a very simple example about nested loop, nested if-else. Okay. So let's see some other example for nested loop, but for example, the ones that be, for example, more complicated with more if-else. For example, we have a variable score, right? And we want to check the value of a score. So it can range from 0 to 100, right? So if, for example, the score is 90, then we will say grade to be A. Or if a score, let's say, is greater equal than 90, is greater equal than 80, then grade B, for example, B, right? Or if score is greater equal than 70, then we want to say the grade B, C. Or if score is greater equal than 60, then the grade B, D. If score is less than 60, right? Then grade to be F. Well, let's see how we can implement that, okay? So first we need to initialize, for example, score. Here I will say a score to be, for example, 85. And grade be a char, right? So now we start our if-else. If parentheses score is greater equal 90, then we can change the value of, we can initialize grade to be A. Don't forget semicolon. So that's one if. If it doesn't hold, then we will have else. So else, if the score be greater equal than 80, then grade B B, right? Else, if score is greater equals 70, then grade B, C. Else, if score is greater equals 60, grade B, D. Else, grade B, F, right? So let's see what is the actual result for this code. We are going to print the grade, right? So let's see. Well, you see that it's B, right? Because it's 85, so it's greater than 80 but less than 90. So grade will be B. You see that we very simply could implement this simple problem. So there is also another way to implement this problem. Instead of, for example, writing down else, then here if, we can say else if, like that. Else if, right? Here the same. Or else if. Right? If, else if, see, this is grade, right? Grade, E, F. Let's run the code. Well, you can see that it's the same result. Well, okay, let's see another example. For example, we want to write a program that gets input from the user, right? And we'll manipulate those inputs. So right now, you don't know how to receive and get input, so that's fine if you ignore this part, but I will write it in the code here, okay? I just want to explain the if part. So the example here is the program is in a way that wants to get some input from user. Those inputs are hour and rate, right? Hour is the number of hours that that person works, and rate is the rate of hourly rate of pay. So we are going to receive this input from the user, do some calculation, and then print some information. So we are going to get as input hours and rate from user, calculate base pay and overtime. So base pay and overtime. And then finally, we are going to print hours, that are the number of hours that that person worked per day. We are going to print the rate, which is the hourly rate of pay for that person. We are going to print base pay and overtime pay. And finally, total paycheck for that week. This is the output. So here, the point is how we are going to calculate base pay, overtime, and also the total paycheck, right? So we say we want to calculate base pay in a way that if the hours, the number of hours that that person worked per week is greater than 40, then base pay should be 40 multiplied by rate, and overtime be 1.5 multiplied by rate, multiplied by hours minus 40. And if the number of hours that person works per week is less than 40, means else, right? Then base pay be hours multiplied by rate, right? So let's see how we can implement that. And also one more thing is about paycheck, total paycheck. Total paycheck be base pay plus overtime. Okay, let's implement that. First, since we are going to get some input from user, we need a scanner. So we will import Java util scanner. So right now you don't know about a scanner, so don't worry about that. In the next sessions, I'm going to explain a scanner. But right now, for this example, since we need that, I'm going to use it. So scanner input new scanner be system.in. Then I'm going to declare and initialize hours and rate both be double type And also we need base pay and overtime, right? So double base pay and overtime be 0. We are going to calculate these two based on hours and rates. So first, we need to print, for example, for the user, to a person who is going to enter the hours and rates, right? Okay, please, for example, enter your hours rates of pay as the input, right, in the console. So we need to print that. System.out.print enter your hourly of pay, right? And then we are going to say rate b input dot next double. Okay, don't worry about that since you don't know, that's fine. I'm going to explain this part in the next sessions. System.out.print enter the number of hours you work. Hours be input dot next double, right? And now the if statement. If hours is greater than 40, then we are going to say base pay be 40 multiplied by rate, right? Base pay be 40 multiplied by rate. Then overtime be 1.5 multiplied by rate multiplied by hours minus 40. Else, base pay be hours multiplied by rate. And at the end, system.out.print f hours worked be hours, right? So print the next line, since it's double, right? And hours, then system.out.printf hourly pay rate B dot 2 F and system dot out dot printf base pay B and finally printing the total paycheck. Oops, we forgot double quotation. Total paycheck this week is dot 2F and base pay plus overtime, right? Let's see. So you see here it says enter your hourly of pay. So we enter, for example, 20. Enter number of hours you work per week. For example, 100. Now you can see hours worked 100, hourly pay rate 20, base pay, and total paycheck. So here we saw how we could implement a simple if-else statement.